Welcome to the 2-Month Review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which we take a book, break it down, talk about it section by section, bit by bit, analyze, make jokes, have fun. I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox.
Good morning, Chad. Have you ever started a show strong?
No.
Do you have something against it or something?
I have. It's performance anxiety. I don't think we need to talk about performance anxiety at this top of the show. We can get there. We can get there.
Fine. Nothing wrong. That's fine. It's totally fine.
Also joined as always by Katie Whittemore, translator of numerous books, including one that I'd like you to pitch to us.
Okay. Hi. I forgot that I had to do that. I just wheeled myself over to grab it.
So we have there's like as an opening banter. Yeah, start with that. There's a lot of like good news about stuff. There's a lot of good news about stuff to share. Starting with like one of Open Letter's books, Catcalling was longlisted for the Penn Poetry and Translation Prize. And then also we found out last week that this magazine, The Happy Reader, with a seemingly 500-page interview with Sarah Jessica Parker, includes a picture in the middle of a bunch of books that she's read that has your translation of 4x4 by Sarah Mesa, a former 2-Month Review title, pictured in it. I'm trying to find it.
Who
anyone
would have thought? I see it. There it is.
Katie Whitmore, you are such a Carrie. I swear, you are such a Carrie.
Go on.
And Chad, you are a Miranda.
I am a Miranda. I think I'm more of a Mr. Big because I Peloton and die. That's essentially what
you just spoiled that. You just spoiled the first episode for me. I haven't seen it yet.
Spoilers! That was like the number one thing that was on.
I haven't been on the internet either.
I still haven't seen the movies, so I wouldn't feel right until I watch the movies first. I got to get caught up. So.
Oh, dude, I listened to this podcast for a while. That was it was basically like they took one shitty movie and watched it every single week for a year, and they watched Sex and the City 2. And the first episode, they're like, we can make this. This is doable. And then by like the 6th episode, they're like, I can't handle any of this anymore. Like, they're like, I've already figured out who my favorite extra is. They're like focusing on the weirdest details to just try and make it through this 2-hour-long abomination of a film 52 times.
So they had to watch the same film every week? That was
every week and talk about it for like 40 minutes.
But on a more serious note, when she's involved in publishing, correct?
Correct. And that's what this is about. One of the funniest visuals I've ever seen was at Winter Institute is like the bookseller get together. There's it's very lots of cat sweaters and, bookish nerd tote bags. And there's a room that's generally like just an abandoned sort of classroom looking thing. All these books are laid out that are all the galleys that people are giving away. And it's like the antithesis of Hollywood. It is just like bare bones, tables with books stacked up. And there's a video of Sarah Jessica Parker coming to Winter Institute to announce her publishing line and going in there and being like, this is so wonderful. And it's like such a contrast between like a pure Hollywood icon that has like a certain aura to her, and then like this sort of sad people like shuffling by, stuffing books into their tote bag and like moving on with their cat sweaters. No offense to booksellers or cats or sweaters.
Yeah, buy our books.
Buy our books. Also related to that, the book that we're promoting at Winter Institute this year is Mother's Dome by Katisha Aguirre, which was announced that it's going to be made into a movie. And that's another book that you translated, Katie.
That's right.
So congratulations on that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, just these Spanish authors and Basque authors just popping up in all kinds of multimedia.
Yeah, it's kind of
all right. So what are you pitching to us?
Oh, well,
yeah, you have a new thing out.
Yes, so I'm just pitching this. This is called Wolfskin. Oops, hold on there. It's by Lara Moreno, and it's coming out in January from Structo Press in the UK. So you'll need to, everyone will need to go to Book Depository to buy this.
AKA
free worldwide shipping. What?
AKA Amazon.
Is that Amazon?
They own it. They bought it.
Oh, well, I don't know what to tell you.
Who cares?
Or if there, anybody has any friends in publishing around here, the U.S. rights are available, and we are extremely interested in seeing this book published by a North American press. So this is by Lara Moreno. She is a fantastic Spanish writer. She's a poet, an essayist as well. And this is her second novel. And it's just so beautifully written. Oh my God, I'm obsessed. Laura was one of the first people that I started reading and like kind of dabbling with in translation a couple of years ago when I decided that I wanted to see if maybe I could become a literary translator. And so I've been friends with Laura since I started like just getting my feet wet in the field, and she's amazing. So yeah, so this book is coming up by Structo. Structo is a young small literary press out of the UK and Amsterdam. And they are born of Structo magazine, which is it's pretty long running and respected literary magazine out of the UK. So
what's the title again?
It's called Wolfskin.
Wolfskin. Okay.
Yeah. Can I read you? Should I read you the jacket copy? Because I can't pitch without a support. You can pitch it.
I read it. No, but you read the jacket copy. The jacket copy is better than my pitch. My pitch would probably veer.
Okay. Sophia is 35 and her husband has left her. Her father died the year before and her mother is living in the Canary Islands with a new partner. Sophia flees the city with her young son, seeking refuge in her father's house on the southern coast of Spain, where she spent summers as a girl. Her younger sister, with whom she has a close but uneasy relationship, joins her. Living together once again, the sisters face their present as well as their childhood and tangled past. A novel from one of Spain's most remarkable authors, Wolfskin is an intimate meditation on ambivalence and motherhood, eroticism and disappointment, family violence and failure, and ultimately the possibility or impossibility of living with those you love.
So it is a really beautiful book and very like people who like long winding sentences that really capture like thoughts and emotions. This book is definitely for you. It's also really structurally interesting in the sense that it's kind of braided and you pay attention to the wrong character most of the time. Which I think is one of the unique facets of it. So that's my pitch for it. Brian, what did you do this week? I mean, you're having a better week than Urban Meyer, so got that going. You didn't kick anyone either, apparently, or maybe you did.
No, I've just had a very quiet, easy week, just like I like.
Nice. And reading 2666, which I don't think I even mentioned at that not so strong opening that's the book that we're talking about. It's 2666 by Roberto Bolaño, and we are up to part 5, the final part, the part about Archimboldi. So we went up to page 721, which is quite a haul last night.
Yeah, it was a lot.
And I realized how long it was. But alas, let's get started. What did you think of this section now that we've moved on from crimes, from fate, from critics, from geometry? Brian, this is your first time hitting this. So what's your initial thought?
It's a neat trick, I think, that Bolaño did with this, because starting off, it's fine, but I wouldn't have cared very much unless there was all this mystery surrounding this character, and like you finally want to know about him so bad that you're just kind of like soaking in every detail you can get. But had it not been this build up to it, I would have been like, yeah, that's nice writing, whatever. But it's so good because of who is this mystery person, wanting to know it so bad. So I thought it's a neat little trick.
I think I read somewhere that supposedly this is the part that was written first.
Oh, really?
Well, it has the most character detail. Like you're trying to suss it out more than any other part. So it would make, I could see that.
I'm going to spill my theoretical seed here really early.
I don't think that's a good metaphor.
This section has so much masturbation. Masturbation is a healing thing, according to whatever his name was. It is good for you. It heals the soul and the body.
Vogel.
Yeah. See, Vogel knows what's up. So I wonder, when we've been talking about repetition throughout this whole process.
I'm sorry. I'm really trying to pay attention.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about repetition and the way that things are like the systems that create these things that happen over and over again. And this is the first time that hitting this part at this point where we go back in time, where it starts to ask the question, I think, theoretically, one could ask the question of whether or not this sort of horror and violence is repetitive, circular, or is an ongoing progressive violence. Like, are we headed toward the abyss, or are we constantly recycling the same sorts of problems? Brian.
Yeah, I noticed very clearly.
Raise your hand.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt anybody. I noticed it was the fact that it starts with these broken bodies from the First War was not, it's very clear and evident. Like, this is the world he's growing up in, and then what he's going to go through, and then what's going to happen next. It seems very evident that these echoes are seeded by Bolaño.
I wonder how many times we can work that joke in here.
God. I think that's so interesting because a part of me wants to say that this is like sort of more of like a, like a teleological view of history, and that there is this sort of, progression. But I've been thinking more about the fact that I think this is like, in some ways, about almost like the absence of time. It's like all of these things, the way that the layers work for me anyway, it's like you're like dipping in and out of time and in and out of history, that those echoes, the same sorts of people, madness, violence will be present wherever you land, right, in time. And I think I go back to like when Kessler is talking about those excluded from society, and he's talking about, like the French Commune, and he's talking about the slave ships, and then we're here, and we've got like World War I, we have World War II, we have references to like the dictatorship in Latin America. It just feels like, it doesn't feel like violence is getting worse. It just feels like it's always there, and it's always bad, and it's the same type of conflict. Like the same sorts of conflicts are present and keep cropping up.
It's interesting because I'm thinking too about the narrator and the title 2666, and they're kind of out of time when they're talking about this, so that it doesn't like the sequence of events doesn't necessarily matter.
No.
Like if you imagine like a god looking at, if time is a river and you put a twig, like it can see where it's going,
everything,
what's happening. It doesn't matter. Like, you're out of time.
That is such a perfect visual.
Like
maybe, yeah. And I thought it was really interesting too. This idea when we get later talking about music and the fourth dimension, and that kind of is like, I don't really understand the fourth dimension because I'm an idiot about.
I live
like,
in the 10th dimension, so
the 10th dimension.
You. It's like burning.
Yeah. But when you mention that, it made me immediately think about those weird thoughts about music or art being the only thing that can take us into that dimension.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely something there with that. I feel you.
There's so much. I don't even know how we're going to get through. There's so much to talk about in this section.
You pick a spot. You go for what you want to bring to it.
Can I just give you guys like a rapid fire list of things that I'm curious about, and we can see what you guys want to talk about, and I hope we have time to hit a bunch of it. Okay, so I want to talk about Dracula and the undead, and I want to talk about well, I guess that's kind of the main thing.
That's kind of it.
But I do want to talk a little bit more about time, and I'm also interested in the idea a little bit about. There's a really interesting passage in here where he's talking about the sick, and he's talking about like the diseased. Bolaño, the narrator, and hold on, I just want to point to this because I think there's something interesting in that too. Where did I have this? I have a million notes.
Not 100% sure I know.
It's kind of early on, and hold on. I think we should talk about Archimboldi's reading history.
Yeah,
his introduction to books,
and how it splits off in the end. We were getting stories of two different writers that he's reading in a space, which is weird.
All right, before we talk about Dracula, all right, on 661, here's this interesting little thing. So he's talking about when Hans Reiter gets back to his little like bedsit room, and his roommate is sick, the night watchman, whose sort of like role he takes. Healthy people flee contact with the diseased. This rule applies to almost everyone. Hans Reiter was an exception. He feared neither the healthy nor the diseased. He never got bored. He was always eager to help, and he greatly valued the notion, so vague, so malleable, so warped, of friendship. The diseased, anyway, are more interesting than the healthy. The words of the diseased, even those who can manage only a murmur, carry more weight than those of the healthy. Then, too, all the healthy people will in the future know disease. That sense of time, the diseased man's sense of time. What hidden treasure in a desert cave? I mean, I can't help but think about the writer behind these words, Bolaño, writing at the end of his life as well. And so I think that's kind of a cool section. And the idea that then too, all healthy people in the future will know disease. That sense of time, the diseased man's sense of time. What treasure hidden in a desert cave? Like, what does that mean to you guys?
You go, Brian. I'm looking for something.
Like, what's the diseased man's sense of time? That's the treasure.
I was looking for the part, Brian, you're muted. I was looking for the part, isn't there a section in here where they talk about death and the role of death? And I was thinking of the sense of time in relation to that, of like the diseased man knows that there is an end. So sort of that there is a completion point. There is what's the exact line again? Where that's
on 681 is when they're in the castle, and they're commenting on, like, they discuss death, murder, and culture, and everybody, and it's like that little 3-beat set up again where like 3 characters, I think it's 3, give their opinion on these different subjects. So that's on 681 is when they talk about death.
I have it marked down here, right? Oh, 681. Sorry.
Yeah.
You know, murder is easy to criminal courts. I can't find it. Doesn't matter. But yeah, I was thinking of it as that, as like the ill have a better sense of time in the sense that they can see an end to it.
Sorry. Yeah, it's my 681. Do you want me to read it to you? This part okay. So that night during dinner, they talked about the crypt, but they also talked about other things. They talked about death. Holmes, I'm not good at pronouncing German, said that death itself was only an illusion and under permanent construction, that in reality it didn't exist. The SS officer said that death was a necessity. No one in his right mind, he said, would stand for a world full of turtles or giraffes. Death, he concluded, served a regulatory function. The young scholar Popescu said that death, in the Eastern tradition, was only a passage. What wasn't clear, he said, or at least not to him, was toward what place, what reality that passage led.
There's so many interesting like reflections and echoes here. If you're rapid fire off things to like talk about, mine would just be different illusions that pop up.
Yeah.
So that specific part links to 715, where Ansky says reality, murmured Ansky, can be pure desire. Like their ideas of what reality is, and how like the fourth dimension stuff kind of ties in this too. That's one reflection. And right there on the next page, you get on 683, they're talking about his friend Hans's dad, the painter. And then she's saying like, well, I never saw, I asked him what they were like. My father looked at me and said they were just dead women. Portraits of my aunt? No, my father said other women, all dead, which also resonates really heavily with both this and with Distant Star. And there's so many others I was marking. It's just like, this is crazy. It feels like the madman in the madhouse, the mathematician is similar to our guy, whatever his name was, that cut off his hand back in book 1. Yeah.
Well, and then the use of math again, like, you know, you have the geometry book and the ready-made, you know, and the idea of like, well, what are we? Yeah. So do you want to talk about the dimensions a little bit?
Well, just real quick before, there's another really nice one that fits into that conversation they're having in the castle on earlier in 657 with Halder. Halder answers took him by surprise. Halder said, "It's because I don't have a proper grasp of history and I need to brush up." "What for?" asked Hans Ritter. "To fill a void." "Voids can't be filled," said Hans Ritter. "Yes, they can." Like this kind of these weird philosophical conversations about death or voids or time. echo throughout.
That goes back to something you said a long time ago, Katie, of voids versus abyss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As well. This is random. We're jumping all over the place, but I just remembered this because we have the Baroness. Is that I can't read the name Baroness without thinking of the G.I. Joe character who looks like this. And that is what I envision her as at all points in time, that they're spying on her through their little crack, and she's like in pure leather Nazi gear, just getting it.
Cobra Commander.
Well, and
Cobra Commander. Cobra Commander.
And Frisco at one point is described as a Superman. So you can imagine him in a Superman costume if you want at the same time.
Yeah. Right.
But if you think about these people, these characters, right? Europe has just been shattered by something completely unknowable and unthinkable, right? Like the Great War. Like if you're a time traveler and goes, "Oh, you survived World War I," they'd be like, "Wait, what?" This was the Great War. This is the one to end all wars.
Yeah, it's over now.
Generations of people gone. Right. Oh, let's give it a decade. We'll be back.
You'll be back.
But you know, these intellectuals, and like how would you think about reading history after that? Or what are your thoughts about the books you read? What are the meanings of them after you're this generation, and then to be drafted into it and going through it again, and it's your turn, and that's what it really gives a neat dimension to what these conversations are. That I mean, it's something unknowable for me, obviously, but yeah.
That is interesting, because I was always thinking of it as history in like the contemporary sense of the word, but it is probably like Greek history.
Could be. I mean, it goes back to with that quasi. I thought it was funny, but when the World War I veteran is talking about all the different
all the swine,
and just like no one is human.
Yeah.
Right, and and you just went through where you're slaughtering each other. Like we did the same thing with the women being killed. They're not human. You call them swine, and you take away their humanity so that you can maybe either cope with what you've done, or it makes it easier to do what you have to do. But I found at first I thought it was just like this kind of humorous. Oh, here's an old man that's just saying like just a racist old man. But then it makes a lot of sense why you would have that viewpoint coming out of your body all bandaged up. You're on fire. You look like a mummy or whatever, and the whole world, everything's swine.
Yeah, that scene. So Hans's father, when he's in the hospital and he gives the mummy the cigarette, is like a haunting sort of scene as well.
It sure is.
Like,
so wait, we have mummies and vampires. Hold on a second.
And there's like zombies. There's a lot of like the undead.
Hold on, wait. Yeah, another one.
So I want to talk about this a little bit, and I have to reference it. Let me find it. There's a fun blog post out there by someone about his textual evidence for
That's
why.
Fun blog post is an oxymoron, by the way.
This was fun. So hold on, let me just I like Dracula in 2666. I want to cite him. Okay. This is from September 11th, 2012. Biblioclept.
Oh, yeah. Edwin
Turner. And he says, wherein I suggest Dracula is a character in Bolaño's 2666. So I'm not going to go through his evidence, but I want to point to a few things that I think are interesting. So if you guys will recall, the first time that Dracula comes up in the book, do you guys remember when it is?
Whoa. No.
Was it the part of the critics?
I think it's the part about the crimes with the penitent. When Juan de Dios is like with the psychologist lover, and they start talking about all the phobias, and they're talking about the sacrophobia. So I think that like the first time that Dracula comes up is in relation to like in relation to the penitent and to the crimes, right? So in this section, they directly like say they're like at Dracula's castle. It's all spooky. Like the ride up to it is super spooky. Like Ryder is like looking out, from their like transport or whatever, and is like seeing these black mountains in the distance. And Anyway, they get there and the Baroness is there, and she's there. There's an SS officer who like acts like he owns the castle, and then the people like that are the soldiers that are arriving, Ryder and Wilkes is another one, and the other couple other guys. And then there's the Baroness, and she's with Entrescu, who's a Romanian general, right? And then the young scholar Popescu, who's hysterical. And I think that's the main people that are there. Anyway, they're all gathered in this castle in Romania, and they talk about Dracula directly at dinner. But before dinner, they have this little excursion down to the crypt, and Ryder goes along with them, and he's like sort of like stands guard at the top. He doesn't go down into the crypt, and he falls asleep. Okay, this is like it's so Gothic, right? So he falls asleep and he has this dream, and in the dream he dreams that this like horrible thing is happening in the crypt, and that there's this agreement that they're going to eat the Baroness von Zumpe, and that there's blood, and anyway, he wakes up and they all come up, but they all have like these weird looks on their faces, like you don't really know what did happen in the crypt.
Yeah.
Then they sit down and they're having dinner, right? And they have dinner and they talk specifically about Dracula, who is either and like the differing opinions are that he's either like a good German, he's like some wonderful like Teutonic figure who had to like flee Germany and live in the East, or he's a or he's Vlad, who was whatever, like, a Romanian hero beating back the Turks, right? So they have this sort of like, Dracula's directly referenced. But what I think is really interesting, and what Edwin, right, his name is, from the blog talks about, is that like, what if this Dracula figure is just sort of like haunting the whole novel? Not necessarily that like Dracula, like the Count with his cape, is like in Santa Teresa sucking blood, but the way that they talk about Dracula here is they say, well, he wasn't, it's not Vlad the Impaler. Dracula is really more of a strangler. Like he's more of a strangler type of guy. There's so these like, you're like, that's weird. I just read like a couple hundred pages about strangling.
He likes to poke things
that
too,
rings a
though.
bell. The idea of like, most sort of modern studies, right, of Dracula relate to sexuality, but also modernity, and also the idea of it's an epistolary novel. It's a novel of writing, of documents. It's like there's this sense of like of documents sort of proliferating, right, the same way that things are proliferating and accelerating in Santa Teresa. So I don't know, I think there's something possibly like to those connections, not necessarily that it's Dracula, but I think it's really interesting to think about these figures of sort of monsters, really, that appear, and the idea that like, what is sucking the blood? Like, is there, what is the parasitic, the vampiric forces that are at play in Santa Teresa? I think it is all connected.
I have a
religion and the land. There's also already the religious aspect of it, but then there's the real estate aspect of it.
Yes.
You stole my thing. Was that?
Sorry, go ahead.
Dracula is all like about real estate, and this is a forthcoming tip. But for the remembered part by Frazan, the third part of the Part trilogy, is a big Dracula plays a big role in there and is analyzed through like the lens of this real estate thing. And one of the things that you mentioned, Katie, about coming back up out of the thing, and you said they all looked weird. That's one of the times that I think the section, I don't know how many times, but I just started noticing it at the end of my reading last night, that there's frequently this reference to like, you could divide them into two groups. You could divide them into two groups. You could divide them into this or that. And there's something about that vampiric quality of like this division of things. And one is sort of colonizing, taking over, expanding its reach. And whether that's good or bad is left to like which side you are on. We have a bunch of comments here from Andre Ross I'm just going to read. It says, Dusk of Dawn by Dubois along with 2666. He touches on the numerous civilizations unknown to us from the past and their ability to sustain themselves without an overbearing militaristic philosophy and approach to living. It's as if this civilization, this life, has nothing to offer but war. In the reading, it felt as if writer would advance with his reading, then suddenly he's enlisting in a war. And that idea of like that our civilization is so war focused, so militaristic.
Well, and this is a little bit unconnected, but thank you, Andre, because that just totally jogged my memory for something else I wanted to bring in as a connection, which is when writer meets Ingeborg. Does anyone?
Don't forget her name. You made a promise. You have to promise to remember her.
Oh, that's right. I swore in the Aztecs.
So in the Aztecs, which I thought of Last Words on Earth at the very first second I hit that, I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
So, but the Aztecs thing is super interesting too. And this made me think about, that brings us right back into Mexico. And do you guys remember you might not. I don't know how many times you watched From Dusk Till Dawn.
Oh. I definitely don't.
But it's a vampire movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
That like Robert Rodriguez. So we've already had his whole like referencing happening in the other part, and at the end of that, if they pull back and they show that like the brothel is built on like an Aztec ruins of an Aztec temple, and that there's this vampiric. There's like a whole like Mesoamerican vampiric tradition, totally, prior to like our European notion of the vampire.
Isn't there like a crack in the ground that can swallow? Like it's on the precipice of like if I recall, right, of like an abyss. I'm trying to remember correctly. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but
but there's like so they bring in like the Aztecs too. There's like this sort of like vampiric connection.
To go off of what the comment you just read, it made me think of something earlier with wars, and you get the changing of maps, things moving around, and then I was thinking of Santa Teresa and this booming city. And there's this small little detail on 658 about stealing items. And Hans decides to help him out. And then at the top of 658 it says, he suggested that Halder order the other servants to shift things around arbitrarily, to empty rooms under the pretext of airing them, to bring up old trunks from the cellars and carry them back down. In a word, to make rearrangements. And I thought like this is the way to hide disappeared items, is to shuffle things around arbitrarily, move it around, and nobody knows it's gone.
Yeah, a little sleight of hand.
So I was thinking about disappeared bodies. I'm thinking about the millions of deaths that take place in wars and and it's just like people in a room that rearrange maps or displace one country and put it someplace else, or make the city grow, and we won't worry about the things that are missing.
I mean, World War II,
that's great.
Ukrainians and Polish flip-flop places on the map, literally, and move into the other side, the other way as they've migrated. So yeah, there is a lot of that displacement. That also goes back to that weird, like all the descriptions in Santa Teresa of like the prison and of things that are like disembodied and like malleable in some way or morphing, really resonates with that as well.
It's interesting you bring that up, Chad, because I had in my notes to bring up just a small point too, a little detail where I wrote in the margin about the prison, and there's like a counter example to that, and it's when they're about to storm a town, and where is it? They're about to storm a town, and Ryder looks at like this little it's like a small fortification, right, in this village. And he looks at it and he said that it looked like it was just like manned by children. And he felt like such tenderness for it. Okay, this is on page 701 at the very bottom. So they had to go and attack a brick fortification on the outskirts of Kirovsky. I feel terrible pronouncing things so badly, but a fort that wouldn't have withstood a single artillery volley, a fort that touched Ryder deeply from the moment he saw it because of the poverty and innocence it radiated, as if it had been built and were manned by children. And I think this is honestly one of the only examples in the book where there's a description of a physical building or a physical space that isn't nightmarish.
That's interesting because the ones that come, there are two others that link up here is the Maginot Line when the person's stuck,
Yes.
the soldier is stuck,
tunnels.
doesn't know how to get out, has the dream about God helping him out. And then when they're in the tunnels trying to find their way to the Baroness's room, I'd like to point out that on 701, right above that very charming section about children is another reference to masturbation. Good Christians masturbate, but we don't commit suicide.
That's your buddy Vilka. He's
But the other one was the one who said that masturbation cures all else.
Oh, yeah, that was Vogel. Yes,
Yeah.
well, Vilka's is writers like Spank Buddy in the title.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe we should talk about that scene too, because I think it'd be difficult if we skip over it. I think we're doing.
I forgot.
Spoiler! That is the scene. Spoiler! That is the scene that way back when I referenced Caitlin Reed's 2666, the erotic novel that I purchased from Amazon some time ago. It is that scene. So she's reading that. So the ebook is just that inside of this context of this woman in a library reading this book and masturbating.
Oh my God.
Like masturbation, meta masturbation.
I don't know why I laugh every time I read it, but it's the in parentheses, he cited Kant as an example.
Yes.
It gets me every time. I don't know why.
Oh my God. So about this sex scene, I think there's some, okay, so this is, I'm just going to have to bring up this blog again, because he makes a really interesting point. And his hypothesis is that the SS officer is the Dracula figure, right? Because he's the one who stays behind in the castle when everybody leaves. He's the one who orders people about cleaning, and it's like he is the man in the castle, owns the castle. He doesn't drink. He's sort of at a remove from everything. And then as they're making their way through the tunnel, when they peep in on him, he's sitting down and is writing furiously by a lit fire. Okay, then they move on, and then they get to eventually the good time Baroness von Zumpen and the general.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this really strange scene where there's an incantation, they're going at it, and he has a gigantic penis, and there's all this blood, she's bleeding, she's wiping blood on his face, there's tons of fluid. It's this sort of it seems like some sort of ritualistic act, right? And the whole time at one point Entrescu is standing there with his arms raised and reciting this poem when the only words that they could recognize were Dracula, right? Yeah. So in this blog post, which we can link to it in the show notes, but what he says is that his idea is that the SS officer has possessed Entrescu, right? So that Dracula can enter the dreams, enter the minds, sort of make shapeshift and make his way into the consciousness of the other people. And so he's writing, whatever he's writing is what then Entrescu is proclaiming as he's doing the Baroness, which is kind of a fun theory.
It's really interesting, and it is that it's not just that they hear the word Dracula; they hear it over and over and over again. It's repeated multiple times in there as an incantation. Yeah, there's so many interesting things here. There's always this part, and that what you just said always reminds me of that Lovecraftian, that group of people who tried to do the ritual to open up the world and said that they fucked up. And that was then World War I, World War II, and they're this is our problem. We made a mistake and did the incantation wrong. That the incantation brought evil into the world, the Black Lodge instead of the White Lodge.
Oh my God! I'm sorry. I don't want to. It's so funny though. It's so extreme. But can I just read a sentence from that part, which is so funny? Okay, this makes me laugh. Okay, so all they can understand is the word Dracula, which was repeated every 4 lines. A poem that might have been martial or satirical or metaphysical or marmoreal or even anti-German, but whose rhythm seemed made to order for the occasion. A poem that the young Baroness, sitting astride Entrescue's thighs, celebrated. This is the part makes me laugh. Celebrated by swaying back and forth like a little shepherdess gone wild in the vastness of Asia, digging her nails into her lover's neck, scrubbing the blood that still flowed from her right hand on her lover's face. It's like, but the little shepherdess gone wild is hysterical. Like, I love that. That's what that's what Natasha translated. Like, that would have been really fun to get that line and to have to come up with that solution.
Absolutely.
So there's a book called A Billion Wicked Thoughts, in which I forgot exactly how the authors mined all the data, but I think it was through Google and like billions of searches. And part of it, they were interested in pornographic searches. And they found that women represent much more so than men. Men are very visual, and they found that women in their pornographic searches were looking for literary examples of pornography. And there's a huge part of it is paranormal, with Draculas and Wolfmans and
hence monster porn.
Monster porn, as Chad likes to bring up.
as going to be a future writer of my new
Make
career.
your millions.
Make my millions. Gonna do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, there's I wonder what's going on here.
Ironically, Brian, that shows up in this book too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and because there's a section, the Everything and Less is about Amazon as the largest cultural force on what's being written for contemporary literature, and part of it revolves around like genre stuff and romance novels in particular, as like fulfilling this satiating this need for like continued series, for things that are repetitive but different in variation, and it references all these like monster porn books too, or like not exactly monster porn but pretty close.
I want to come back to it after I've had a chance to read through the section, but I am interested because the way that juxtaposes to our character losing his virginity at a brothel before he's going to war, and then this scene here, I'd like to really, I think it's not any accident that those are so close to each other at the first part of this section. I don't know what it means or what he's saying in it, but I would like to revisit that after we press forward more.
Because it is interesting, like Rader's sexuality is interesting in its own right, because he's friends with, it's Hans, right? Hans is his, no wait, what's his friend's name?
Hugo.
So Hugo and their Japanese friend go to that one Greta's place every night when they're drunk, and then they like stand fully clothed and massage her naked in like water and various other things. Very interesting. And he always just like, I'm out. He'll go get a beer and go walk around outside and sometimes fall asleep or like whatever. He's not involved. Then they take him to the brothel and they're like, here you go. And he says, no, he doesn't. They then assume, this goes back to something you mentioned at the beginning, Katie, about people on the outside or the excluded. He's the only one that gets drafted to the war. Hugo does not. They also think that he's gone, even though he's there for like a week. And that's when he finally, on his own volition, goes to see the whore, whatever, I forget what her name was. It's whatever. But then we do see him masturbate to the Baroness as well. But his like sexuality grows throughout that, from this like very circumspect, very standoffish, almost naively, so childish, so into like something that's a little bit closer to like being indoctrinated into this other side of things. Sort of like how Billie Eilish claims that pornography made her crazy because she watched it too much when she was little.
Yeah. No, I did like how they
stunned, but she said that she started watching pornography at 11 and it made her insane.
Oh my God.
Right on. I did like how they set him up so uncomfortable with his own body. Like when he's in the water, he's uncomfortable. He's like drowns all the time. But when he's out of the body, he's like an amateur diver at the bottom of the ocean. Like he's not good on land. He's not good in the water. He's too tall. He's uncomfortable.
I mean, he's very tall. He's 6'5". That's very tall. Right?
It's NBA tall.
It's tall.
It's getting there.
So this part about Greta,
guard
this
tall.
part about Greta in the tub, I also highlighted because I think it's awesome. And all I want for Christmas is a Halder and a Nisa to massage me in the bathtub. But
yeah.
What I loved here about the narrative voice is that like there's this part where he like uses the exclamation point. And again, it's funny. There's a lot of humor in this section. Like we're going back to a little bit of like the silliness and the absurdity of like the part about the critics, where there was some funny stuff where like the last section was just, you could not get a laugh in. You really couldn't. And here I feel like there's more sort of like playfulness. But yeah, so it's actually on page 666. And so the musicians go home, they're at Greta's. The night usually ended in bed or the bathtub. A bathtub like few in Berlin, 8 feet long. It's a giant bathtub.
Yeah.
8 feet long and 5 feet wide. It's a pool. That's a pool. Black enamel with claw feet, where Halder and then Nisa endlessly massaged Greta from temples to toes, the two of them fully dressed, even sometimes with their coats on, at Greta's express request, while Greta convorted like a mermaid, sometimes on her back, sometimes on her belly, other times underwater, exclamation point. And I just think that's so funny.
I love that too. Absolutely.
It makes it so human. It reminds us that like someone's telling the story and thinks this is funny and is surprised, you know, that there's like this little moment of like where we see the narrator there. There's another place where we see the narrator, which is really interesting. We have another instance of the I of the narrator's first person. At the beginning, it's when he references Borges and Canetti.
Yep.
Yeah.
And and so he's talking about
I got it. It's on
English and the sea.
39.
639.
And that's out of time as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is okay. Do you want, and someone else I read a lot today. Anyone else want to read?
No.
Oh, just real quick though, that last scene reminded me. There's a Prince song. I think it's called "The Ballad of Dorothy Parker," where he doesn't want to get in trouble, so he leaves his clothes on and gets into the bubble bath with the person because he figures like nothing bad can happen if I'm wearing all my clothes.
Yeah, I'm not naked. I'm just in the tub.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we have. I mean, it's the first instance of Hans Reiter. Okay, on 639. In 1920, Hans Reiter was born. He seemed less like a child than like a strand of seaweed. Canetti and Borges too, I think, two very different men, said that just as the sea was the symbol or mirror of the English, the forest was the metaphor the Germans inhabited. Hans Reiter defied this rule from the moment he was born. And then we have a little bit later, like just this. This is interesting. This
And then he's
conception
in the
of him.
bathtub next. What the heck is with bathtubs going on?
And then he's in the
here?
bathtub. It's the water. So what he liked, but he didn't like the regular sea, right? What he liked was the seabed, that other earth, with its plains that weren't plains and valleys that weren't valleys and cliffs that weren't cliffs.
Okay.
So it's like, you know, he's alien. He's from this other world. He's most comfortable on this other world, in this other space.
Okay, this is going to be both funny and another point. So the novel that Ivanov writes at the end, which we haven't really gotten to that, and we might want to talk about Hans's reading stuff in a second, but he is reading these notes, and these notes include this tale of this writer, Ivanov, who writes a book called Twilight, which is another supernatural book, but obviously not. But at the same time, this book, as it's described, sounds like a fucking Frazan book.
I thought so too.
Crazy Frazan book, like absolutely. But right there on the very first part, it's like the novel so unanimously acclaimed was called Twilight. And its plot was very simple. A boy of 14 abandons his family to join the ranks of the revolution. It says all the men's wounds are rapidly healed. Then a very thin, very tall creature, more like a strand of seaweed than a human being, the alien that comes down and gets him. So this seaweed, the seaweed metaphor runs throughout and is showing up not in relation to Hans this time, but in relation to a book embedded in a book embedded in a book.
That Hans is reading.
Right.
I know. Yeah. I mean, that's just, it's like, I suppose that could just be accidental and coincidental, but I don't know why.
I don't know why it would be.
I don't know why he would do that. I mean, they're weird descriptions anyway. Like to say that a person is like a long, skinny strand of seaweed, and then in the same, couple dozen pages later, say that an alien is like a long, stringy seaweed. It's like,
I was thinking of him as the seaweed as sort of like 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 we're talking about, like floating along, like being moved by these larger currents, by being moved by this larger
Mhm.
context of which he's like inside of, but not apart from. What does Vogel think that he is?
But
Vogel thinks he's
also,
seaweed.
He
but
does
more
think
than
he's
that, there's the. I mean, he really hammers it home with him drawing it all the time, like
Yeah.
obsessively with the book
And it's his
that he
first book.
carries around.
which obviously ties into the cover of
Oh yeah,
the third
that's
volume.
where it is.
Yeah, which is, I forget what Emily said about this, but I want to either ask her or go back and listen to that of like the artwork for this. This is the description, or these are from the Curiosity box
Yeah.
thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So his first book that he gets that he steals is on, what is the actual name of it? I don't want to screw it up.
Something of coastal
Got it.
Europe.
Animals and Plants of European Coastal Region. And
That old Jim.
I think it's so funny that like when he is talking to Hugo, and Hugo's like, "Oh, you need to read a book, a good book." He's like, "I do have a good book."
Yeah.
It's like, that's so fantastic.
When he packs up, I don't think it's when he's going to war, but when he packs up somewhere to go, maybe it's to move to Berlin. He takes it with him, like as an adult. It's like one of his few belongings.
Like a security blanket, or
yes, security seaweed.
What does it mean later then when he decides to just take the cowboy novels?
So,
okay, the cowboy novels we need to get to, but he doesn't have one reading. Doesn't he have a reading experience before that as Parsible?
Yes, Parsible.
Okay, Parsible comes first, and then the cowboy, then the Karl May book.
Yeah.
I've never read this Parsible. Anyone?
No, I haven't.
But it's about. I think it's one of like those like the night.
Like, do you want to hear the wiki description?
Sure, that's probably more succinct than mine.
No, yours is probably more engaging than this. Parsible begins with the nightly adventures of Parsible's father, Gahamarat, his marriage to Herzeloid, and the birth of Parsible. The story continues as Parsible meets three elegant knights, decides to seek King Arthur, and continues a spiritual and physical search for the Grail. A long section is devoted to Parsible's friend Gawain and his adventures defending himself from a false murder charge and winning the hand of the maiden Orgelos. That's a terrible name for a maiden.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there's the main thing is that it's one of the first books in German that included like the Holy Grail and that sort of activity, and that he is like a hero underneath.
The Green Knight.
So the other thing that's really interesting about that is that the way that Wolfram, the writer, is described, right? So the first book he takes, and then this is when his friend said, this is when Halder says, "Oh, well, this is perfect because this book basically, it's like totally you. Mm-hmm. It's totally what you're gonna want to be, who you're gonna want to be, what you're gonna aspire to, although you're not gonna get there." So it's interesting. So let's look at because I think there's a few places where we're getting like a little I don't know if it's tongue in cheek or if it's just a wink or what it is, but where we're getting a sense of like what the narrator, possibly what Bolaño, wants us to think about Bolaño. That's what I argue. What Bolaño wants us to think about Bolaño. As
that sort of.
As a figure. So here, look at this. So this is on page 658. All right. So it's Wolfram von Eichenbach's Parsival, right? And then Halder says it was the perfect book for him. Just as Wolfram von Eichenbach was the author in whom he would find the clearest resemblance to himself or his inner being or what he aspired to be, and regrettably would never become, though he might come this close, said Halder. It's awesome, right? But also there again is like sort of a bit of a prophecy, right? There's like this prophesizing that we see throughout the whole of the books, all right? So Wolfram, Hans discovered, said of himself, "I fled the pursuit of letters." Wolfram, Hans discovered, here we go, here we have the repetition, these beats. Wolfram, Hans discovered, broke with the archetype of the courtly knight and denied himself all training, all clerical schooling. Wolfram, Hans discovered, unlike the troubadours and the mina singers, declined to serve a lady. Wolfram, Hans discovered, declared that he was untutored in the arts, not to boast of a lack of education, but as a way of saying, underline, he was free from the burden of Latin learning, and that he was a lay and independent knight. Lay and independent. Okay. So, and then in the next paragraph, but Wolfram's pride, I fled the pursuit of letters. I was untutored in the arts. A pride that stands aloof, a pride that says, die, all of you, but I'll live, confers on him a halo of dizzying mystery, of terrible indifference, which attracted the young Hans the way a giant magnet attracts a slender nail. So, it's this concept of like writer as rebel, writer as outside. Bolaño was really, really interested, I think, in continuing to sort of like emphasize this myth of him as like an autodidact, and of him as sort of like, again, like that, like the rebel poet who's outside of the academy, outside of the institution. And so here we have this wink, I think, to that sort of writer. Later, when we get to Ivanov, and we have Bolaño via the narrator's description of another type of writer, which is a writer who is afraid. And what is that writer afraid of? Anyone remember? Come on, class.
Well, School Marm Katie's bringing it today.
I'm bringing it. Okay, so this is wonderful. On page 722. Oh,
I didn't read that
it's
far.
because I read ahead.
Yeah, I didn't go that far.
Sorry, guys.
Peter, we failed your pop
Oh,
quiz
okay.
because your pop quiz was flawed.
Yeah.
It was.
When you're talking about though, the writer and the way Bolaño sees himself, I like this part at the end of that section you were reading though. He says, and what he liked most and what made him cry and roll laughing in the grass was that Parsifal sometimes rode wearing his madman's garb under his suit of armor.
Yeah.
So that duality of, being crazy and wild and free, but then the exterior of the shining knight.
Just to drive home the point that a lot of this book is about lineage as well, and like that passing down of things. That Parsifal is the inspiration for the Wagner's opera, which turns back into the Nazi realm very quickly.
And when Ryder is going off to war at one point, when he's like marching, and he's like, they have these great descriptions of him just sort of like moving through space as if he's on a seabed. He says that he imagines madman's garb under his like Nazi uniform.
And I can't believe we've held this till now, but how much does writer sound like writer?
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Bad one, but it's just sitting there. It's sitting right there.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to have to get off soon, but you guys can continue if you must.
So one thing we can think about, since now we're getting into like the Ansky papers deeply for next week, and I was talking one page ahead. But
one page.
It was literally one page. But I think this is a really interesting part on 7-11. And we should talk about like the Soviets, and we should talk about utopias and utopic writing. And I think that would be really interesting to highlight.
I like that then Boris Pilniak is mentioned in here, who is part of the Fox and the Dubrovsky-Greshik season of 2-month review.
Perfect.
As on how to write a story and how to create a story. So yeah, I think that I was going to say the same thing that you're indicating, Katie, is that this section goes better with next week. It is interesting that he's now is in like hiding space, reading these documents, but we're not reading the actual documents. We're reading a different telling of the documents that he's reading that include a tale about another author within that document. So
with other books.
I think it's very fun. I think it's very cool. And I think that'll lead to a lot of like opening up about stuff like that. It feels like, to me, just in summary, that this first, like each time that we approach one of these new parts, there's sort of something that gets set forth in the first section that we do, in which we notice a bunch of like things that all sort of like reflect on another and set up a game. And then it's by the end that we see kind of how that all pulls itself together and reaches other things. And I think this section does a really good job of that, of your Dracula stuff, the various echoes that go back to the madman and the mathematician, the writer, the the vision of who the writer is, like what you just read, all that stuff like really does tie into everything else and gives us sort of a groundwork of things to pay attention to going forward. And I think that's one of the charms of Bolaño's books as a whole. Or at least this book. I don't know if I should talk about all of them this way, but this book is that in each part, you're given enough little moments of interest that sort of tell you what to watch for in the future. It teaches you, you got to read it. It gives you like a compelling,
some like code,
not necessarily compelling. In summary, like the part about the crimes, like if you try to summarize that as a plot for like a movie, it really wouldn't sound, it would just sound gruesome. But like the intellectual parts of it that it teaches you to pay attention to and threads throughout there are what makes the book so engaging, I think. I have a bunch of lines of the weeks, but someone else go first. I think I'll go with the craziest one.
I've got one teed up. It's on page 666. This is like the second or third time this has happened where somebody says something strange or profound and you get the wonderful deadpan answer. Everything is a burned book, my dear maestro. Music, the 10th dimension, the 4th dimension, cradles, the production of bullets and rifles, westerns, all burned books. What are you talking about? Asked the director. I was just stating my opinion.
That's one of my favorites.
So good.
It feels very Bolaño-esque, I guess, for this book, where it's like, I have these great ideas. I want to tell my friends about it. And I imagine the friends are like, what the hell are you talking about? I don't know. Like that's the discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to go? I've got two. I just can't find the second one right now.
Okay.
There it is.
Let's see. Well, this is not. Well, I don't know if it's really a favorite, but I'm something that I think is interesting. Hold on, sorry guys, I just lost it.
Maybe it's past the section we read. Is it on like page 890?
No, it's
900?
I was not reading ahead there. Okay, here we go. All right, it's on page 703, which is well within the bounds of this reading.
Okay.
Okay, so here, this is when they're, in one of the battles, they're attacking something, right? And they walk by this little house, and there's like a little old man with a white beard, like looking out the window and watching as they go by. And then on the other side of the garden, there was a dirt road, and a little farther on, they saw 5 Soviet soldiers dragging a field gun behind them. They killed all 5 and kept running. Some continued along the road, and others turned into a pine grove. In the grove, Ryder spotted a figure in the undergrowth and stopped. It was the statue of a Greek goddess, or so he believed. Her hair was gathered up and she was tall, her expression impassive. Bathed in sweat, Ryder began to shake and stretched out his hand. The marble or stone, he couldn't say which, was cold. There was something absurd about where it stood, because that hidden spot in the trees was hardly the place for a statue. For a brief and painful instant, Ryder thought he should ask it something, but no question occurred to him, and his face twisted in a grimace of suffering. Then he ran.
Yeah, I have that mark too. I really like that. I'm gonna do one that's serious and one that's not. Also, I want to put a pin in that. We need to talk about Karl May's cowboy books next week for this. So the idea of the Western in general. So the first one, the serious one, ties into both of your two. 654. He's talking about or whatever. A redemption that smelled of peat smoke, of cabbage soup, of the wind tangled in the forest undergrowth. A redemption that smelled of mirror, thought young Ryder, nearly choking on his bread. I love the smell of mirror in particular. Yeah. But then my fun one is, this is from the Ivanov's book, which sounds like very much a Rodrigo Frazan book, is that the kid who's taken by the aliens ends up in New York City. He's not having a good time. He meets a jazz musician who tells him about chickens that talk and probably think. Quote, the worst of it, the musician says to him, is that the governments of the planet know it. That's why so many people raise chickens. The boy objects that the chickens are raised to be eaten. The musician says, that's what the chickens want. And he finishes by saying, fucking masochistic chickens. They have our leaders by the balls.
Oh, man.
Good times. So I don't know where we go to next week, but it's probably like far long. than any of us really expected to be. It probably is to about page 800. It'll be linked in the show notes. I'll link to that blog post that you're referring to.
Okay.
I'll also link to Book Depository, where you can purchase Wolfskin along with any other book from the UK and have it shipped worldwide free of charge. Also, I will, even though we're not sponsored by them this week, I did do my wisdom speech. I gave my wisdom presentation. I tweeted it. I followed all the rules. I did the thing that I was supposed to do, and I gave a 25-minute speech on getting into publishing that was listened to live by 25 or 30 people.
Really?
I listened to it, and I definitely don't want to get into publishing after hearing your talk.
I know, I didn't either. I was like walking around in a circle being like, this is a bummer. It's the wisdom app is interesting, but it does require something. Like I've always joked that I would do one of these solo someday, and I probably will end up having to do one of these episodes solo, but without any feedback whatsoever, like no feedback. It's very
You're
strange.
literally talking to yourself.
I'm literally talking to myself and pretending people are listening. But that's there, so that's done. Also,
can I just interject one small thing?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that Book Depository was owned by Amazon. So for all of our independent bookseller friends out there, I'm sorry.
Well, okay, so
I don't want to get hate.
Yeah, whatever, man. The
I
independent.
just don't know how else you get the books from the UK for free shipping. I just don't know.
I don't either. And so some local or some independent bookstores may be able to order it through Gardner's or through one of the other export services. It is very difficult at this moment in time because of Brexit. It does not help. The other thing is that bookshop.uk exists, so you can use Bookshop UK for anyone living overseas to get the book.
Well, this book is a real beaut, so I hope that people find the way.
Go get it. Go buy it. Rate us. Review us. Masturbate, but don't commit suicide.